Hey everyone, welcome to episode 300 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. We celebrate this milestone with a very special episode in our Artists Asking Artists series with our guest, Marc Adamus, and our co-host, Rajesh Jyotiswaran. Marc probably does not need an introduction for most of our listeners. However, it is safe to say that he has become a modern icon in the landscape photography community. His style of photography has inspired and propelled many other photographers, including myself. Marc's influence popularized the fantastical and dreamy look that has become mainstream over the past decade, much to the chagrin of some old school practitioners and the excitement of up-and-coming digital artists. It is safe to say that Marc single-handedly revolutionized landscape photography as we know it. Before we dive into the episode with Marc, I have a huge favor to ask of you. Producing this podcast is expensive and it takes a lot of my time. If you value these conversations, please take a moment to support us on Patreon. Hit pause and go to patreon.com/fstop and listen, or look for a link in the show notes. Okay, let's get to this week's episode with Marc Adamus and Rajesh Jyotiswaran. Well, I am excited to kick off the fourth iteration of our Artists Asking Artists series here on the podcast. And with us today is my colleague Rajesh Jyotiswaran and Marc Adamus. Thank you both for joining me for the podcast today.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, it's exciting to finally to see you virtually in person, Marc.
Close enough.
Right. Awesome. Well, let's just quickly knock out some introductions. Rajesh, if you want to just quickly introduce yourself, and then Marc, you can go after that.
Sure. Good morning, Marc, and good morning, Matt. It's a real honor that we get to talk to one of the most incredibly famous artists and landscape photographers of our generation, Marc Adamus, today. And my name is Rajesh Jyotiswaran, and I'm a landscape photographer based in Northern California, and also a co-founder of the National Landscape Photography Award.
How you all doing? I'm Marc Adamus. You've probably seen my work online, magazines, books, whatever. I'm based all over the place. I've been traveling for 25 years now. My business is based in Glen Allen, Alaska, and I have properties in Oregon and Hawaii. I'm also originally from Oregon.
Yes, I lived in Portland for 2 years in 2013 to 2015, and so I got to hang out with Brian Adelberg and Jeremy.
Yeah, right on. Brian's a good buddy of mine. Yeah, he's a really cool guy.
Yeah, he's super cool. Yeah, awesome. Well, we have a laundry list of conversation here to get through, and so I want to give us as much time as possible for that. So Rajesh, why don't you just go ahead and kick us off with your very first question?
Oh, thank you, Matt. So Marc, you just mentioned that you're originally from Oregon.
Yes.
If memory serves me right, I recall you mentioning that you were born in the northeast of the United States.
Yeah, I was born in Maine. My social security number says Maine, but yeah, most of my growing up was done in Oregon, so I consider myself Oregonian, native Oregonian.
Okay, great. So I was just wondering if I was imagining, but thanks for clarifying that. So
I don't have the Maine accent, as you can tell.
Sure. So tell us a bit more about your childhood and how your love of the outdoors came out to be.
I think I just love the sense of freedom that the outdoors offered. I was always looking for that in my life. I really knew what I wanted to do from a young age. I wanted to travel. I wanted to explore. School for me was just pretty much just waiting for it to be over with. I was always very motivated. I studied meteorology at a young age. I studied geography. I was always sketching, drawing, and I was just creating imaginary worlds as a child. If I couldn't, escape, I was trying to imagine myself being in another place or even another time, and just waiting until I was able to make it happen, really. I didn't really learn very well in school. I'm not excellent by the book kind of student, but I kind of have that artistic mind where I need to try everything myself to see if it works or not, for better or worse, obviously. But that was just the way that I kind of found my way through the world, and ended up where I'm at. Nature obviously, is it's a great freedom. It's a simplistic way of life. It's just as soon as I escaped and went exploring in the outdoors, I found my calling. I mean, I just said, this is it. This is just this amazing, not just freedom, but visual immersion in the landscape, and just it just grew on me really quickly. I could come up with an adventure, and I could put myself to this task of trying to figure out how to accomplish this thing, whether it be climbing a mountain or doing a long distance, ski traverse of a range, in the middle of winter, or even making a photograph. It was, here's a challenge, and let's see if we can find some unique way to accomplish that and enjoy just the simplicity of life that environment offers. I've been in plenty of places where it was the only thing in front of you was to make the image, to not fall off the cliff, to cook food, to you're not surrounded by that constant distraction, that constant era of distractions that we live in here. You're not being pulled 10 different ways at once. It's like you wake up and here's what you're here to do, and I love that.
Yeah, there's something calming about being in a place where you have to focus on your survival more than normal. And for me, it sounds like for you too, it actually is kind of calming to the mind. Like, I'm just focused on, making sure I have enough food, and I have water, and I have a shelter. And,
Yes.
and I
No
love
doubt
that.
at all. My idol and inspiration growing up, the late Galen Rowell, he would often say, the higher I go, the more simple life becomes. And I fully agree with that to a point, certainly. I mean, I've been in some pretty stressful situations, up high in the mountains, or, doing whatever. But, even when I look back on those times, I think they're almost addictive in the sense that you realize that there was a clarity of mind that occurred at those moments that is very difficult to obtain any other way.
Yeah, and those experiences are incredibly difficult to translate into photos as well, I find.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think with that, Mark probably answered like half a dozen of my questions already.
That's all right.
So, but we'll still ask again. You can still dwell on them a little bit. But thanks for that explanation, Mark. So I have heard that your mother has safely kept all the weather maps that you created as a child. Is that
Yeah.
true?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she has. She has them somewhere. Yeah. I'm a big geek when it comes to like the meteorological science. So even as a child, I think that was a big important way of connecting to a place. And yeah, I used to graph the weather data get the data out of the newspaper and put it on a wall graph.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she still does have that stuff lying around somewhere, and also a lot of my sketches and drawings and things of that nature.
They may
when I was
make
young.
good pictures
That's
for a
amazing.
book that you might publish sometime.
Yeah, very, very possible. Yeah.
I love that you have a connection with maps, because when I was a young kid, my parents would, take me camping into the Colorado mountains, and of course, when you're a kid, you're super bored, and and especially riding in the car, and they're like, "Here, look at this topo map and see if you can tell us what's on the map and if you can see it around you." And that hugely connected me to the landscape at a young age in terms of like memorizing landmarks and place marks. And I grew super fond and familiar of those places through maps. So I think it's cool that you said that.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. The topographical maps are, really where my roots are too, in terms of like learning how to interpret the landscapes and find routes and hike and everything. But even before that, as a child, my parents, they had a AAA membership. They didn't want to buy me maps, so they would take me down to the AAA office and they would just tell them, "Hey, we're thinking about going here and here and here," and then they would give out all the free guidebooks and free maps, for those places. So I love just reading about that, all those places and looking at the road maps as a child. Just there's the only kind of maps I could get my hands on, when I was 9 years old.
Yeah. Well, awesome.
At what age did you realize that you wanted to have landscape photography as a career, Mark?
Probably about 22, 23. Now, I mean, mind you, I am a landscape photographer, but I mean, my business is that I own a tourism company and we provide logistics for people that want to get to the ends of the earth. And one of the things we do is we teach photography, but the trips are not just solely photography. We have plenty of trips where you go on an adventure and it doesn't matter whether you've got a camera or not, you're going to have an unbelievable adventure in some of the most remote places in the world. And that's my passion. And I was guiding wilderness trips when I was 17 years old. I was always the guy that all my friends looked to design the trip, to provide the logistics, to figure out the routes, I was always the one that was organizing and getting people together to go do these crazy adventures. So in that context, I've been in my present career even longer than that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like whenever people talk about your workshops, they're like, yeah, there's no way I could figure out how to get to that place without Marc's help. And I'm like, yeah.
That's right. That's the core experience that I want to provide people. I do about a third of my workshops are instructional photography, and we do, instruct photography on all of them. But, my passion is just figuring out a way to get you to a place that is just pure immersion in the wilderness, environment in a way that you wouldn't have been able to just walk right up on yourself. I want to be able to provide you with that experience, show you the rest of the world that is not on Instagram or wherever else.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm going to shift gears a little bit, but I know we're going to come back to some of those topics as well. But Marc, when your name comes up in the landscape photography community and with my friends, the very first thing that we talk about is our admiration for how audacious you've been in terms of pushing the art form, especially in regards to your exploration of remote and wild places. And I'm just curious, like, what drives you to continue to push the envelope in this way?
Well, that is my passion, first and foremost. Making images is like a fun aspect of that for me. I love to speak about my adventures through my imagery, but if you took the photography away, then exploration of wilderness lands would still be the first thing that I want to do. It's a big world out there. I feel like everybody's just going to the same places. I feel like that's true now more than ever before. It's extremely predictable. You know exactly where people are going to go for the most part. And I just love to get away from all that. Plus, I mean, I feel like if I don't know what to expect in the landscape, then my connection to it is very pure and very raw. They say there's nothing like your first time, right? I mean, it's like you can go back to a landscape as many times as you want, but it's hard to recreate that impression, that sensation, that connection, that whatever that you had the very first time that you experienced it. And I feel like my eyes are wide open and I'm just ready to absorb everything that the landscape is there to provide, is there to show me, is there to offer when it's my first time seeing it. So that's what really drives me to continue my explorations.
I love that. I feel the same way about new locations that I've never been to before. It's there's something about seeing a place for the very first time that for me sparks tremendous amount of creativity in terms of trying to understand it, trying to make sense of it, trying to,
Yeah.
I'm just super curious about all the things I'm seeing around me. And I think that for me, that sparks a lot of creativity. And it sounds like for you, it's the same way.
Oh, for sure. No doubt. No doubt. I love just solving this, from a photography aspect. I just love, it's like a new puzzle, every day. It's like, how do I, go about this? The process of trying to find where to obtain the best light, atmosphere, subject matter, whatever is as exciting as anything. I just love, having that new challenge in front of me all the time.
Yeah. So you mentioned that the photography is kind of secondary to the exploration and the adventure aspect of things. And I'm curious, why photography? Why not, painting or writing stories or things like that? Why have you chosen to use photography as your means of expressing?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I've always been a big fan of the two-dimensional medium. I was always sketching, drawing, a little bit of painting, definitely a lot. But it just it's easier to carry a camera with you, for one thing. I'm in some pretty harsh environments. Painting doesn't hold up well in 50-mile-an-hour winds. I mean, you can kind of paint from memory, but I think there's a very unique connection that photography has with the reality that we're experiencing at the moment. I mean, certainly photography these days, there's a lot of mixing and blending, that some people like to do as far as subjects and everything else. But for me, I do, feel like, when I want to describe the trips that I do to people, photography is the very best way, most effective way to do that. And it's the easiest for me to involve myself with when I'm out in very remote areas.
Yeah.
I don't consider myself to be a great writer by any stretch. Uh, I do like to write to supplement, my images, but maybe it's just, I like to move around quickly. Patience is not maybe my strong suit. Rajesh is nodding like, yeah, I've been on some trips with Marc. Yeah. No, I like to constantly, move, and just kind of always, be able to capture what I see instantly, in the camera. And then I come back and I kind of say, hey, how can I tell this story even better? How can I optimize or enhance this image in a way that really brings forth the mood and the feeling, that I have for the place? Of course, I'm not really into mixing, different subjects from different times, especially if they're a permanent feature in the landscape that everybody would see. So I just feel like photography is that, quickest, most unique, most effective connection that I can give people to my experience.
Gotcha. Well, thinking back on your progression as a photographer, I know you were super active on the early days of NPN. I'd love to hear you talk about how you developed your unique way of making images, as I'm sure it wasn't just something that just happened
Yeah,
overnight.
boy, I mean, where do we start? I mean, I've had a long career. It started in film, so there was a big jump right there. Uh, back in the film days, I feel like, with color film especially, it was very difficult to process your own, film and have a lot of control on the back end. So, at that time, like I already mentioned, Galen Rowell had a big influence on me, that style, of, I'm going to use a smaller format and carry it to remote places and, make as many images as possible. But I would use so many techniques in the camera at that time to create the final image, and I think it's really shifted away from these are the things that you're doing, you're not putting, so many filters on, you're not, there's just so many things. When digital first came out, I don't want to make this too long of an answer to your question, so I'm trying to think. Like when
Oh, you're
digital
good.
first came out, I had, kind of been skeptical of it because I'm skeptical of all new technologies. Really doesn't matter what it is. That's just me. But I had already been using a little bit of Photoshop because I learned from the scanning program that I used. I used this Nikon software that was embedded in the scanner that you can color correct and push and pull things a little bit when you're in the process of scanning the Chrome. So when I realized that, I said, hey, this is fun. It's kind of like, the same kind of control I have with the digital printing. And I, got Photoshop and I started, experimenting to see what that could do with my scans, my film. And then I went to digital, and the big hurdle to overcome was that the raw files, from the digital cameras at those times, they just looked so flat and colorless and just boring compared to, my Fuji Velvia scans. And
Right.
it was just like, whoa, now I'm going to have to not just push and pull this and color correct it a little. I'm going to have to take it up a notch here. I'm going to have to learn how to do some Photoshop work. Of course, at that time, there really wasn't anybody teaching artistic Photoshop. It was more just like really rigid and boring and technical, just recipes on how to do things. And, having the artistic background that I do, I just kind of wanted more out of it than that. I already mentioned I don't really learn well by reading or listening to what other people have done. That's just me. I love teaching, but it's just that's the way I learn is I have to just put my hands on it and do it and experiment.
Yeah.
And because there really wasn't any good way to learn at that time either, it just led me to the development of the system that I created, which replaces the way that, Photoshop typically works as far as blending and layers and selections and masks and all these things. And it leaves me with just a quick and easy way to just paint with a brush, and do the adjustments that I want to that way. And very quickly, I might add too. I don't like spending a long time on technical processes because it takes me out of the zone. It takes me out of that flow state. So, for me, that's kind of how I arrived at the process that I've been using ever since. There were a number of years there, obviously, as you guys know, where there really wasn't anybody else making images that looked exactly like mine. Everybody would, there was a number of people that, they were like, what is this? They didn't like it at all. They were like, thought that I was doing all this stuff that I wasn't doing, or, Photoshop was just a new thing back then. So, they couldn't figure out what I was doing. They thought I was just building the whole image from pixels, and, they made it, as many people, loved it as hated it at that time. But my images, nevertheless, they were very unique. And now you look at it, there's just so many gifted artists out there that all have their own refined, like individual styles and ways of approaching the art. So I feel like the art has really matured, now. It's really, it's beautiful to watch. And of course, everybody, the general public, they're all processing on their phone all the time. So,
Right.
everybody gets it now. We're like, okay, we take the image, then we process it, right? But, for me, my techniques haven't really changed a lot ever since I started, doing this. I just love to just paint the painting, just using brushes, and that's it.
Yeah, my friend Mason Cummings was telling me that he took a workshop from you, and he was describing to me kind of one of the techniques you use, which is basically like you have a duplicate layer of your image and you're adjusting the colors on it, and then you're taking like a different brush, probably like a clone stamp or something else, and then applying those changes subtly to the main file using the other file. And it's, to me, like that process is very unique. Like I don't think a lot of people have used that. And I was like, screw it, I'm gonna try that. And I just did it this last trip I did on, because I had I had this section of this panorama where the clouds were all washed out, but I still had the raw file from where the clouds looked fine. So I took those, I pre-processed that section of it, and then I used the clone stamp tool from 2 files and just kind of brushed in back in the clouds that looked okay. And I was like, okay, I see what he's doing. All right, this
Yeah,
makes sense.
still do the clone system sometimes. A lot of times they just work with the history brush because it's faster and you can go back and just take something out later real easily.
Yeah.
I've talked to Adobe and they said they've never seen anybody do anything like that. So I think it's pretty unique.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's part of some of the ways in which you've kind of pushed the art form in a direction that people probably weren't expecting.
It just happens, when you're an artist, and that's just the way you are. You got to find your own way, right, to do stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very unique, and it's very helpful, but you also need to know how to use it with a subtle hand. It cannot be heavy-handed. So, well, I myself use
For
a
any
combination.
for any system, this is true for any system. Yeah.
Right.
No doubt.
Okay. If I may, take us to a different path now. I have a question about travel. So, you travel to some of the most remote areas, especially the Arctic, Patagonia, and many other mountainous regions. When you return to those places over the years, I suspect you see changes in the glaciers and other natural features. Some glaciers may have become lakes, for instance. Have you seen those changes, and how do you feel about them? What is your take on that aspect of our planet?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't help but see changes as landscape photographers. I mean, it's to what extent the cause or to what what caused those changes. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for them. I mean, we've seen like sea stacks just all of a sudden up and collapse on the coast, right? Look at Olympic, right? I mean, there's lots of things. I mean, if you're talking specifically about changes as a result of climate, global warming, climate change, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's hard to say what is directly related to that, what's not. The glaciers up in Alaska between, when down in the Juneau area where we're based from the summer, melted a tremendous amount between the year 1700 and 1850, almost as much as they melted between 1850 and the present day. And that's just a fact. I am definitely a believer of man, having some impact on climate change. Definitely our, use of fossil fuels and putting carbon into the atmosphere. I think it's pretty much a scientific consensus that has some impact on, global temperatures rising, sea currents changing, all those things. But as far as, I'm personally concerned, it's very hard to say, to talk to people in a definitive way and say, like, this is for sure the solution, and this is for sure what is causing the problem, and this is for sure what we should be doing about it. So, I like to just be mindful, of our impact on the planet. And, I'm always, a big promoter of alternative energies, which I think is going to be extremely important. I've made a lot of investments in that realm. We have solar, we have electric cars, at home we can rent electric cars wherever we go. But there's a pro and a con to every decision that you make. Anything you do in life is using energy. Anything you do is making a footprint. So, with that footprint, I think that you're making the best thing that you can do is enlighten people as to how precious these places really are. I have places that I've gone, that are, in terrible danger of being, completely lost forever, not just because of climate change, but because of urban encroachment, because of pollution, because the government doesn't have any financial incentive to try to preserve those lands. We're talking about places in Brazil, places in Mexico, places in Pakistan, lots of places around the world that I go, I feel like that are not on most tourists' radar. Well, if I can say to those potential tourists, hey, look at how beautiful this is. Wouldn't you like to come here? Would you like to see this amazing, pristine place? And they come there, and then all of a sudden the government's like, hey, wait a second. Maybe there is a reason why, maybe there's some financial incentive for us to set aside this area as park, to not cut down this rainforest, to, stop, to clean up the trash, to not, use disposable plastic for everything. There's all sorts of ramifications of what we do, as nature photographers, and it's hard to get around the fact that we're going to consume resources as human beings that like to really do just about anything at all in life. But with that comes a responsibility to, be as mindful as we can and to try to give back, and focus on, not just, the same old places that have been done time and time again. I don't want to go fly around the world just to go, take the same shot that I can find on Google of the same place that's already being touristed to death. I want to say, hey, what about this other area that doesn't have any protection, that doesn't have any tourists? There's definitely, you got to speak, when you're talking about actually creating change that might help these places. You got to speak their language, and their language is give me a financial incentive, to protect this place, to not cut down this rainforest, whatever. And, I think tourism can be a part of that solution, but I think that it also can be detrimental in other ways. So
Yeah.
that's just the line that we walk. And it's hard to say this is exactly what I think about it, and this is exactly what I think the solution should be, but that's kind of how I approach it myself.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, just the fact that we're alive, we're contributing to the problem in some ways. I think the key is like,
Absolutely.
How do you mitigate that? And, to your point, I think tourism can play a role in protecting certain places to a certain degree. And I think tourism can also make the problem worse. So it's like, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
That's life,
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a tough one though. I think we all grapple with it as photographers, especially landscape and travel type photography. I think it's something that's always top of mind for me anyway. It's like, do I really need to go to Iceland? Do I really need to go to that? You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. Well, maybe this is a good segue for my next question. So I would love to hear you tell us about your approach to identifying locations that are of interest to you and how much time you spend getting to know those areas before offering workshops at them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as far as identifying it, I gravitate towards the mountains. Even prior to doing photography, mountaineering, climbing was my, passion outdoors. So that's always been, where my photography has been focused. I love the colder areas of the world, not just the mountains, but the rainforests, around the mountains. I love the temperate rainforest environment. I'm not much of an arid desert kind of guy, but that's just me. I don't mean to offend all you desert guys out there, but I'm just like, there's a lot of simplicity in the desert, and there's a lot of complexity in the rainforest. But for me personally, I love to be in the rainforest environment, and where that kind of meets the mountains is kind of like the best possible place for me. I think that's probably why I do a lot of trips in New Zealand, Patagonia, fjords, Alaska, Pacific Northwest, all those things. It's because that's just kind of my favorite landscape. As far as how to identify places to go, I've never been there before. That's the first and foremost thing. If I'm always exploring. I'm always going back to explore new places. I even do that with groups. A lot of my groups want to learn from me about how to approach a place for a first time. From a photography perspective, how to break it down and simplify it, and find how and where and when to take those photographs. So watching me go through that process for my first time is really, really beneficial to them, especially some of my more advanced groups. Some I deal with a lot of other professional photographers as well. They probably make up about a third of my clientele on a lot of my longer trips. And they love to see just, well, if I've never been there, how would I go about, finding the best route, finding the best perspective, finding the best light, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't ever have to have been there to, conduct a tour, to conduct a workshop, but I have to have good connections in that area. I have to know what to expect as far as transportation goes, as far as the people that I work with. I employ about 45 people around the globe every year to help facilitate various logistics for our groups, from porters to, climbers, guides, drivers, other logistics people, permitting people locally. So, you got to have good connections in those areas. But as far as the actual photography goes, I'm probably going to be able to teach you even more if I've never seen the place before in my life than if I've gone there a dozen times. So that's kind of the way that I approach it. There's certain areas that are really remote and really foreign to me personally, like the Middle East or Pakistan, something like that, where, okay, I've got to have at least experience working in that region, and have good logistical connections in that region before I feel like, bringing a group of people on a new route. But as far as what we do in the landscape, the only kind of pictures that I take usually are the first time that I ever saw that thing or that place or whatever. So, it's kind of, it's what I like to teach people too, is I like to not know what to expect when I'm approaching a landscape, because it just really opens my mind to the possibilities that are around me, and it allows me to react to whatever the landscape's given me.
That's awesome to hear that. I'm very similar now. I hate scouting personally. I would rather just hike and see what I can find, kind of a thing.
You and me both. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I did want to ask you more about the logistics stuff, because I personally, I can do logistics. It's fine, but it's not fun for me. Like, it's not exciting for me. So I'm curious, for you, is it more of like an ends to a means, or do you actually kind of enjoy the process of making those connections and figuring out, okay, I'm going to have to rent a helicopter, and then I'm going to have a pack raft, and like, do you enjoy that side of it, or is it more just like unnecessary?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I do enjoy that logistical side of it, believe it or not. I know it's complex. It's a lot of thinking. It's a lot of multitasking. But it's a fun puzzle for me to solve. It's a fun challenge to solve. It's what I do really well, is keeping all the logistics in my head and trying to figure out just, how are we going to make this happen? And when you give that to your clients, when you give them something really special that they just never could have imagined doing in that way, in that place, then it's just so worth it for me. I love it. It's a great gift that I can give to those people. And it's just, it's fun for me. So I'm kind of weird that way. I'm like a logistics geek. Like, I'll figure it out.
Okay. No, I love that. I had kind of another follow-up to that, because I'm a people person. I have a master's degree in clinical psychology, so I love studying people. But when people get involved into the mix of those kind of logistics, it can obviously greatly complicate things. So I'm curious, like, I know one thing you probably grapple with all the time is the idea that when you have people joining you on these workshops, they have lots of different things that they want to accomplish that might not always mesh with kind of your logistics and the plan and what's going on in your head about how you're going to get from A to Z. And some people want to get the shot, and then other people just want to explore the location that you're taking them to. So I'm curious, how do you make both types of people happy in the field, knowing that you have all of these logistical puzzles that have to fit in perfectly to make the trip a success?
Well, I describe my trips, and our approach really well to people prior to, their attendance. And if it's a more exploratory type of trip without specific goals in mind, then we try to explain that to people. If it's a more instructional trip with more specific goals, specific places in mind, we try to let people know. But anybody that's ever taken one of my trips, they're going to get a really good shot. It might not be the shot that we talk about, but all of my materials, all of my philosophy, everything that we always talk about is about avoiding, the iconic, locations and the places where there's big crowds and everything. So people usually do show up with an open mind. I don't get anybody that's showing up on my trip that's just hunting, an iconic, shot of a place. They are always ready for adventure and ready to discover something new because we do a really good job explaining that to people, I think, before they come. Certainly you have different types of people on trips, but I think you're dealing with the best of the best here in photography. I've never dealt in life with a better group, of people than photographers. As a guide and an instructor, I mean, definitely it's, something that's, I think falls on me to be able to explain myself and my approach and have people come, ready for that, and I think I do a pretty good job of that. So that's how I would, that's how I would explain
so
it.
No Mesa Archie on your itinerary, right, Marc?
No, it doesn't happen. I mean, occasionally we're driving by, some place like that, and I'm like, hey, you guys want to do it, you go do it during the day, all right? You don't go do it yourself. Stop by, have a look, say you've been there, take your selfie, whatever. It's not, people know me well enough to know that, it's just not something that we're there to do.
Yeah. So, Marc, in your adventures, what kind of safety and security concerns exist in some of the places you shoot or offer workshops in? And how do you go about mitigating that risk?
Well, I mean, this is going to be like a 1 hour podcast. I mean, or 2 hour or whatever. I mean, that's like the whole thing right there, right? I mean, there's so many different types of risks that you are trying to mitigate when you do tours and when you do adventures, to really remote places like I do. I mean, pick one. Are we talking about, bears in Alaska? Are we talking about, checkpoints in the Tibet region of China? I mean, what are we talking about here? I mean, there's like, give me one example.
I would love to hear about some of the more remote mountainous regions like, Pakistan, Afghanistan, that part of the world, because I think
know local people and know them really well. Like one of the guys that I work with really closely down there, Atif, I'd known him since the Nature Photographers Network days. We've talked for 20 years online. You got to really make connections and get to know those people personally to where you have a lot of trust, in them and what they're telling you, what they've got to say. I mean, as far as Pakistan, I mean, I've hardly ever anywhere met friendlier people, than there. But certainly, you've got to really make friends with the locals, trust in the locals. You've got to understand the government, system for applying for permits and permissions to go into certain places. But I mean, it's don't just take what they say for granted either. Not the locals, but our government, makes a lot of enemies for whatever reason here in the United States. Let's just say,
right.
And there's a lot of there's a lot of government level, information out there. If I look up a location, like let's say I'm going to Saudi or something to the Tabuk region, go photograph some sandstone, there's going to be a laundry list of alerts and reasons, listed on every government website to not go there. And to what extent that's actually reality and to what extent, it's just, the government's not liking each other, not getting along, it's, it's hard to say. I mean, the people are great everywhere. If you have great connections with the people, and you're not doing any, you're not culturally offensive to people. You're not doing anything to, you know, uh, discredit them or to, trying to infringe on their territory. It's, like we're always hiring villagers. We're always hiring lots of locals. We're always taking the locals' recommendations on how we should do things and where we should stay. And, you don't want to come in and just impress yourself. And this is the way I do things. And this is and you guys all need to fall in line, right? You've got to really listen to people. You've got to really embrace, what they're telling you and why they're telling you that. So you got to be a good listener, and you've got to, really try to work with people and make those local connections on the ground to ensure that what you're doing ends up, with your safety and at the forefront. But there's a lot of misinformation out there too, and I really want to stress that. I am way more in danger walking downtown at night in San Francisco than I am in Pakistan. I'm going to tell you that right now. I don't care what anybody has to say about it. It's the honest to God truth.
Yeah.
Haven't been to San Francisco. I believe that.
I'm going to say the same thing about Portland. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of issues around here.
Yeah. Right. So Matt is a vegan, so we will bear some details here. But I know you had told me about your culinary experiences in Pakistan and how you enjoyed it. And I also spoken to some folks that...
Yeah, you probably don't want to know all of this, man.
I'm a vegetarian, so I can handle it.
Okay. So I also spoken to some folks that were in your groups that pretty much stuck to Yamarai type, like pre-packaged meals. So, I can understand, where they're coming from. And so definitely there's a sense of adventure on your side. So, I just wanted to put it.
Well, yeah, I mean, culinary arts does happen to be another interest of mine. It's another artistic interest of mine. So, yeah, we always make sure people eat well on our groups. And, hey, Pakistan's some of the best food anywhere, it's for sure. But, yeah, those guys, let's just say they made sure that we had really fresh things to eat all the time.
Yeah.
Take that to mean what you want.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Marc, a little serious note here. So last year you had a horrifying and heartbreaking injury, and many people noticed that, what, I achieved so much and it's time I took it easy. But you went right back to your adventures within a few weeks and a couple of months?
Well, I had to take 3 weeks off of leading trips, but believe me, I tried to come back sooner than that and realized very quickly that was not a responsible approach. That I just was, I'm always eager but yeah, you gotta take time to heal sometimes. So it was. The injury that Rajesh is talking about, if you don't know, was I posted a little bit about it on my website, but it was a freak thing. We were base camping up on this glacier in Alaska and just setting up camp, not with a regular group, not with a photo tour group, just friends of mine. And I just was admiring the scenery while I was carrying a big pack and slipped on the rubble, which was on top of the glacial surface, and I just kind of went down into a big ravine, big hole, and landed face first, and just shattered my whole shoulder and broke the arm in 6 places. It broke the socket so badly that they weren't able to set the shoulder back in place without doing additional surgery to make sure that the socket would have enough stability to hold the shoulder, the humerus back in place. And it was a very complicated shoulder surgery. And I'm lucky to have most of my range of motion and not really any pain in that shoulder at this point. I did some really long backpacking trips this year, really long adventures this year. So, I think it's as good as it can get, but I mean, to anyone who says, "Oh, I think I'm going to take it easy," I'm like, "What are you doing? You've got one life to live. This is it, man. Get out there. There's risk in anything. You're more likely to die driving to, I'm in LA right now. You're more likely to driving to LAX than you are, on a glacier in Alaska, like 10 times over. I guarantee it, man. You've seen how people drive here. It's like, come
Yeah.
on,
I'm
what are you
glad to hear
doing?
that you're doing better. And
Yeah.
so no more shooting with your left hand, or no more using your camera with your left hand.
No. Oh God, that's tough. That is really tough. Oh, for anybody that's ever tried to shoot with one hand, I feel for you, man. That is it. I thought it would be a lot easier. Yeah, but yeah, just both hands on it now.
That's what
For sure.
tripods are for, Mark.
Well, if you ever tried to operate a tripod with one hand too, you're gonna find out everything's tough.
I totally get it. That's funny.
So I know you mentioned Galen Drow already a few times. If I'm not mistaken, Mark, your son's name is Galen, right?
That's right. Yes.
Okay, and I suppose he was named after Galen Drow?
Yes. Of course. Yeah.
Okay. So you're a massive fan of Galen. And
yes.
So just tell us in a little bit more detail about how Galen inspired you and shaped your career.
I think that Galen and I are real similar personality-wise. We're both just go, like really high energy people. I think that, at the time that I first started photography, I was into mountaineering and climbing at that time, and that's how I knew Galen Rowell. For me at that time in my life, it was kind of every trip was, I'm going to go climb this, or I'm going to go do this route, or I'm going to go ski tour this range. And that was my objective. And then when I became aware of his work through the American Alpine Journal, and I saw his, he was a very gifted writer about his adventures as well. So he really brought it on all sorts of different levels. And I became aware of his photography, so I started looking into it more, and I read his book, High and Wild, and then I got the Mountain Light book, and I said, man, this guy he just loves life, and he just loves adventures, and he just never stops. And I mean, that just, I could really relate to that. And, I thought, man, if I could take pictures even half as good as this guy, that would be really a lot of fun. It'd be a really good way for me to tell people about what I'm doing. So, I'd already gotten a camera at that point. I'd been gifted a camera at that point, but I wasn't really that serious about it. It was mainly just documenting things. And, so I started using the same film as him and used the same filters and got wide angle lenses like he had, and just kind of looked at his artistic approach. And, how it is, when that photo bug bites you, it's all over. You want to do everything's go get the photo, now. So the thing that I really respected about Galen, especially now, even more so now, looking back on his, career, having done this myself for a couple decades, is that he really pushed the envelope into places and perspectives that nobody else ever thought of, before or since. His images were tremendously unique and distinctly his own. And that spirit of adventure and exploration really runs deeply through all of his shots. So, I really feel like if I had not had somebody to show me that bridge, from where I was at with the climbing and mountaineering to the photography, then I may have been on a completely different, path in life. I think I would still be involved in the tourism industry in some way. But I don't think that I would have made my name for myself through the medium of photography the way that I did. So he really had more impact than any other person on, what I ended up doing for the rest of my life.
Great. Mark, one other question, personal. So as the cliche goes, behind every successful man is a successful woman, and vice versa. You have told me in the past that your wife is something of a Renaissance woman.
That she is.
Could you please provide a peek into that side of your life and how you both managed to keep such a strong union and raise a child,
Yeah,
given your,
absolutely. Well, we
yeah,
do have a little bit of a unique relationship, that's for sure. I mean, there's when they say there's somebody out there for everyone, I'm really lucky, I feel like, to have found her, because I don't think there are a whole lot that are like my wife Annie. We've been together almost 20 years now. Um, she uh, has a degree in art history. She has been a lifelong artist, but she is a dabbler in many, many things. I like to focus, I like to zero in on, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to do it really well. I'm going to do it 1,000%. She's more like, I'm going to do a little of this, little of that, little of that, little of that. But she, having that art, the history, part of the art background, is it's amazing. Like, I mean, if she is the person to tell you, if you want to know what kind of socks somebody was wearing in 14th century Italy, she will be able to tell you that. I mean, just this obscure information, right? It seems that way, but she has so much knowledge across all art forms, especially three-dimensional art forms, sculpture, fashion, metalwork, jewelry, all, she is she's a great critique of images too. Like, she can paint, she can draw, she just does it all. And she can always find that one thing that she would change about an image that nobody else sees. That's a good idea too. So she's just very, very well versed in art, and she enjoys travel, because she enjoys cultural history, and cultural history and artistic history are very inextricably linked. We've traveled around the world to see galleries and museums of all kinds and all places. And I get a lot of that too, out of that too. And I feel like that really helps to shape and inspire my own, view of, my own artistic direction. Um, Even when we were first getting to know each other, we really kind of took it slow. I think we had both been in relationships where the other individual kind of became a little bit too, attached there, maybe a little too clingy, needy, whatever word you want to use. It was just kind of like, oh, you're not going to see me today. Well, you hate me. It was never like that. For us, we were just kind of like, we both need our space. I don't think that it's a situation where, you know, uh, we would gain anything from being together all the time. I think we both might be that kind of person that it doesn't matter who they're with. If they're with that same person all the time, it probably wouldn't work out. And by that, I mean, like, just being together in the same house, cooking every meal, doing every chore, just, so what we do is we really just try to maximize our time together. And I think it's that way with me and my son too. Certainly I do travel a lot, but at least I get to control my schedule, which is something that you can't say, maybe for every, parent that works a lot. A lot of times they're, subject to the whims of their job, whether it be in the military or what have you. I mean, thank goodness for anybody that does that job. But I'm really lucky in that I get to shape my schedule around the times that it works best for my son to either take a leave from school or around his breaks, so that we are able to really get the most out of our time together. He's a teenager now. Maybe hanging out with parents is not the first thing on his mind. So, I feel like, okay, well, I could be there every day, but I would just be there. He's going to need his time to see his friends, to live his life, to do his thing. But when we do see each other, we're having meaningful experiences. And I think that's why we've all grown really close over the years, is because we always have these really meaningful experiences to draw from every time we do see each other. Luckily, he still enjoys traveling with us. We take some of his friends with us too from time to time, and it's just kind of the way that we've always done things. I think that not to get too off topic, but I do hear about situations where a passion like nature photography might cause some strife in a relationship or whatever. Yeah. But, I married into this, like from the moment that we were first together on the first day, I was a professional nature photographer. So it's always been like this, for us. So I think that's the key thing. And, to that point too, I would say my wife, Annie, she grew up an only child. And she did not have a good parental relationship. She did not have a good parental situation at all. So when you're an only child and you don't have a good parental situation, you learn to be very independent. You learn to content yourself and be, self-motivating and self-starting on everything. And you learn to treasure your time, doing your own things. You need that in your life. So I think she was very much that way, and I was always that way. So that just works out best for us.
Sounds like a perfect match.
Yeah. I mean, but don't get me wrong, because we do miss each other a lot, and it's good that, we can talk, there's only one person that I talk to probably every week of my life, and I talk to her every day of my life. Like, there's never any day we don't communicate in some way, shape, or form. So we're always there for each other. We're always bouncing ideas off each other. We're always talking.
That's brilliant.
My son's 15 and has zero interest in photography. I'm curious, has your son showed any interest in your work or in your
I mean, I think if you just kind of take all the things that interest me and then you do the opposite of whatever that is, then that pretty much best describes the situation. So that's to a lot of extent, I think, teens will be teens, man. We all got to find our own way. I had a great deal of respect for my father, who was a PhD biologist, but it was not my thing. Going through all that, science and book learning and school and going out and doing the site assessments and all this, it just wasn't my thing. I wanted to go my own direction, and that was especially true when I was 15. I was like,
right.
Okay, God, just don't do what my parents are doing. Just anything but that. I want to see what the other possibilities are. But then I kind of I look back on it and I have more respect, for what my parents, really did, at this point, looking back on it. But yeah, my son, he's probably more, built for the times here than I am. If the computer's doing something I can't figure out, like this morning, I mean, he's always the one. His art is on the computer. He's doing all this. He's going to be one of those guys that creates the metaverse or something. He's always, he lives in a world that I have a hard time even understanding. But thank goodness, he really does enjoy the connection to what's in front of him as well, and he does enjoy travel and he gets a lot out of that too. But yeah, I've never tried to push photography on him. I've never said, hey, I'm going to get you this camera and we're going to go out on trips until you learn how to use it. My parents always just let me pursue my own passions, and I just want to let him, support him in what his passions are as much as I can.
Love it.
So I just wanted to tell our audience that, because they cannot see us, but we can see each other. The last question about Annie and Galen was what made Marc the most excited, and I could see the joy and happiness in how your eyes lit up, and the talking about them. It was so special. So I just wanted to say that to our audiences.
Oh, she's a special woman for sure, and Galen's a special son, no doubt.
I love it. Well, I had really just one or two more questions on my side. I wanted to go back. I really loved what you said early on about the connection with the experience and with reality, and how photography can take you back to that experience. And obviously, you are obsessed with nature and wilderness just as much as I am. I think probably more, and which is really hard, by the way. My wife makes fun of me all the time. So at the same time, you take a lot of artistic liberties when you edit your work. And so I'm really curious for you, what is your creative process for conveying that special experience to your viewers while instilling your artistic side into the photo? Where do you kind of mix those two things?
Well, I think that, it all starts with, what I believe my viewer would expect to see, when they go to that place. What would be their reality? How am I going to describe that, to them? Because I'm leading tours, and this is, if I take Mount Rainier and I, warp it or something into the point where it looks like Cerro Torre or something, and then I go take people to that place, then that's, they're not going to have, an accurate representation of what I saw. But on the other hand, what is really an accurate, representation of what you saw, right? So I think that for me, it starts with subjects that I think are permanent fixtures of the landscape. You've got things like atmosphere, which can be changing at all times, and how the light interacts with the atmosphere, how the light interacts with the subjects can be changing at all times. And those types of things in Photoshop are really fun for me to kind of enhance and shape in the best way possible. But at the other hand, if there's a tree growing on the bank of a river, I'm not going to remove the whole tree. I'm not going to put the whole tree there. I'm not going to move, the river into a different place, whatever. It has to be something that I believe could have occurred, at the very least. Everybody's going to interpret things differently. Everybody's going to feel places differently. Certainly just the act of passing light through a lens, warps and changes things a lot, especially depending on your focal length, where the subjects are positioned, everything. But it has to be something that I believe that my viewer, if in fact they did accompany me to that place, would be able to recognize and be able to say, oh yeah, I remember that mountain from Marc's picture, and it was lit differently, and atmosphere was different, color different in his picture. But, I remember the shape, the form of that landscape, those permanent things. So that's kind of the baseline for me, is those, what I consider to be permanent fixtures of the landscape.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you for that. Rajesh, I think you're up.
Yeah. We talked, I think you covered some of these, but who were your inspirations from the art world and from photography world over the years?
Other than Galen.
Oh man.
Yeah.
There's so much. Yeah. I mean, certainly, as an artist myself, I like to just create. I don't like to say, like when I was starting sketching and drawing at a young age, I didn't have necessarily any inspirations other than I just really wanted to do it. I just really wanted to, learn this myself, and just find my own way. That was what was fun for me. I think that to a certain extent, it can actually be beneficial to not look too specifically at, I want to emulate this person's style or that person's style or whatever. But now, having done this for a long time, now I can now I'm coming back and I'm saying wow, I really respect what this person did. I really respect what this person did and everything. We talk a lot about the late, great painter Albert Bierstadt on my trips. And I think one of the reasons why we talk about his work and to a lesser extent other like Hudson River School artists or Frederick Church or some of the people that shaped his work. The reason why we bring his name up over and over again was because he was really in a lot of sense the first person to go to some of what is now the national parks and see some of those places like Yosemite Valley, while there were still natives, living in the valley, and he painted those scenes and he interpreted them artistically in a, I think what we would consider as a pretty loose interpretation by today's standards of what, the place actually looked like. But the way that he used light and luminosity, the way that that's used throughout a lot of Hudson River School artists, is very attractive to us as photographers, I think, because the camera doesn't necessarily capture that. The camera doesn't necessarily capture the a diffuse glow, emanating from a light source, like the way that painters can, for example. So, certainly across other arts, I have lots and lots of inspirations, from music to culinary to, you name it. But as far as how they shape my artistic approach to photography, I don't know. And it's hard to say. There's I think definitely touring around the world with Annie and going to all these galleries and looking at all these great painters. I love the Dutch realism. I think a lot of that kind of bleeds into me. It just kind of maybe not like directly this person for sure has had an influence, but this style has had like an influence on me. I've always been like, Picasso, what the heck is this? Like, why are we even doing this? Like, I don't even know, but then you give me something like the Dutch realists, some, intimate life, still life scene. It's just like with this exquisite detail, or you give me like a Rembrandt or something, with this incredible detail and incredible accurate use of light and color and shading and tone or whatever it is. That's the stuff that's always really that I've gravitated towards. And I think that it must have had some, impact on my photography. It must have had some, connection to what I do, but it's hard to say to what extent exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Related to that, Mark, is there anyone out there, a photographer or an artist, you look at and think, gosh, I wish I could do what they do?
No. There's not.
He's being honest.
I don't believe that there is. No, I'm content doing what I do. My style hasn't changed over the years. I've been able to create my own world to the extent that I want to. I'm certainly envious of shots that other people get in places. I'm like certainly really inspired by what other people do. But is there somebody where I can say they're doing something that I can't possibly, do that I really, really want to do? I can't think of anything. No, I mean, it's like, this is what I want to do, what I'm doing.
Well,
Thank you, Mark.
I had one more question for you, Mark, and it talks a little bit about technology, because it sounds like you have an interesting relationship with technology. I mean, you've been kind of an early adopter, you
Love-hate.
Right, yeah, you went from film to digital, and
Yeah.
you've innovated a lot of processing techniques. But I'm curious about this new technology that's kind of emerging with AI, and it's a very powerful tool that's honestly, we're starting to see it's creating better images than a lot of photographers are capable of capturing that look pretty realistic. So I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts of AI as it relates to the future of landscape photography?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, AI is definitely capable of creating amazing images. It's just that those images that it's creating don't really have anything to do with what interests us as photographers. So I don't really see them as being the same thing. I don't really see them as being in the same scope. I mean, they're both two-dimensional mediums. But, if I wanted to paint the painting, from scratch, of some fantastical place or of some iconic place or whatever, I would paint the painting, or if I can't paint, maybe I'd have AI create it. But photography is different than that. What photography is it's a representation of an experience. It's something that we are doing, and we want to capture the specific moment that we saw that will never exist again. And AI was not there. It was not seeing that moment at that time, at that place. So people are always going to want to make their own memory, their own documentary capture of that time and place, and to whatever extent they want AI to assist them with post-production of that image is going to be entirely up to them. Certainly, I think that AI will help the technical aspects of photography tremendously. We've seen it already with, I mean, I can plug a shot into Topaz that's from 6400 ISO, and it looks as good as if I shot it at ISO 100. There's some amazing, technical aspects that'll help us, with like blending, multiple images that don't align properly because you were trying to focus stack it, you were moving the camera all over the place, stuff like that. So I think that from a technical aspect, it'll really help photographers. From an artistic aspect, it's not art. I don't care what anybody says. Art only has one definition, and that is self-expression. It's self-expression. If something's going to create the thing for you, then that's not you expressing yourself. I think that one of the things that we have seen in other arts where AI has already, come in, taken over, done its thing, like music, for example, is that artists still want to create. They still want to put their own personal touch on things. They still want to learn how to play instruments. They still want to mix things. They still want to create their own personal, product, out of, it make it distinctly their own experience. And I think photography is even more like that, because photography, you're not just creating something from the ground up. You are capturing a specific moment that you observed. You're, capturing something that you saw. As far as illustration goes, as far as advertising goes, stuff like that, AI is going to come in and probably dominate those fields, as far as I can tell. For sure. I think the ability to create images quickly and seamlessly is going to be really beneficial, but it's never, even on any level, going to replace our desire to capture the experience that we personally had in nature.
I love your answer, Mark. That's exactly how I feel as well. One of the things that's I've found kind of a head scratcher for myself is I'm starting to see some landscape photographers generate images using AI and then showing it to their audience as if it was their landscape photograph that they created without any captioning or any mention that it was all generated in Midjourney or whatever. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why people would want to do that, to use AI to replace their ability to create
well, for this very brief window in time right now, well, it's a new thing. Just while it's a new thing, they believe that that's going to get them more likes. They're going to get more attention. But by the time AI, saturates the market, with these types of images, I think you're going to see the emphasis shift back on, people that are actually, capturing those places, actually going to those places, doing those things. But certainly it's a topic of a lot of debate. Anytime an art form changes, we saw it when Photoshop came out. Mm-hmm. It's like, this person's manipulating their shots in Photoshop. So how can we ever trust them again? Why would they ever want to do that? It's taken away from this image that they could have captured on film, which we can prove, was an actual that they saw because it's a physical thing. We can hold it in our hand. We can't do that with digital. So there was a time when, every generation or so is, an art form changes. And I think that you'll see an emphasis, not just in photography, but throughout the artistic community in general, with painters, with anyone really, an emphasis on creating new ways to prove or to reassure to the viewer that this is something that you saw or you created. Because, look at what the market for great painting is, right? It's, if you don't have some way to verify that you actually did this painting and not AI, then it's, where is it all going to go? I don't know. It's, there's a lot of different ways it can go, but I don't think people are ever going to get tired of wanting human created art. I think the market's always going to be much better for anybody that can say, that this is an actual place that I did actually see, and this is my art that I created from it. So maybe there'll be some new way to verify that we are not even thinking of right now, because I think it's just essential, and it's something that people want to have.
I don't know if this is a question that often comes up. You shoot quite a bit of drone these days, right, Marc?
Yes.
So as a big shift happened towards drone photography from shooting with the camera, your style of work, and about what percentage do you think is more drone these days?
Probably about I don't know, maybe I've always loved aerial photography. I always have done a lot of helicopter stuff and plane stuff, and it's a big part of getting to where I go. So probably almost a third of my shots, especially from really remote areas, are drone. It's definitely a cheaper and way more environmentally friendly way to get those types of perspectives on the landscape than you would have if you hired a helicopter out to do the same thing. So got that going for it for sure. Yeah, I don't really see like a big movement towards like drones or aerial photography because of the massive regulations that are associated with those things. Almost all of the R&D on drones in the world is in the military. So, it's very, I saw a lot of excitement about it, maybe like 10 years ago when they were starting to come out, but, then they just got so massively regulated that they're probably not going to be that much use to most people. But for somebody that's going to really remote places and route finding and trying to come up with aerial perspectives on things that are just too big to observe, with your eyes, like a glacier, for example, it's very, very useful tool. So I use them a whole lot, and not, just for photography, but I use them equal as much for scouting. People are like, oh, aren't you glad you don't have to hike, to this place because you flew the drone? And I'm like, no, actually, the drone has caused me to have to hike to this whole other place because I didn't realize the perspective was that good over there. And now I've got to hike there on foot, so I use the drones a lot just to kind of help with route finding and scouting and gaining a better understanding of perspective, so that I can use my time on foot, my time out there hiking, more effectively to get to the shots on the ground that I want as well. But definitely, when you see my shots, you might not think, oh, a third of these are drone shots. Well, I fly a drone from like an FPV perspective, like I'm an expert at flying drones, and I get into spots, so tight, and so small that I'm having to focus stack, with the drone, and I'm doing panoramas that are focus stacked and all sorts of crazy stuff. And it looks like I'm standing right there at that place. And I like those types of perspectives too. Let's face it, there are places you just can't get to. There's places that, you'd have to mount a month-long, expedition to have to figure out how to get onto this cliff to take this perspective. So, I don't like the drones to replace what I do on the grounds, but I like them to open up new possibilities and also show me other things that I could have imagined, never imagined doing from the ground as well as from air.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I would say about maybe not quite a third, but maybe a fifth of my images nowadays are drone. But I don't know. I'm still, there's still something about the experience of actually physically standing in the place where you were literally standing.
No doubt. I would much rather just be physically standing there, and better yet, if I can, camp there, and just really immerse myself in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's also like I've gained a newfound appreciation for certain subjects, like for example, like the Badlands, in the Southwest, where
Yeah.
you can really see kind of the effect of erosion and the interconnectedness of the geology,
It's amazing.
and you can just kind of understand the place maybe on a little bit deeper level in some aspects just by taking that view on things.
Yeah, I know we've both been to some of the similar places there, kind of around Mexican Hat. But like on the ground, it's like, it's kind of cool. But when you get in the air, it's like, holy smokes, what am I looking
Yeah,
at?
I didn't know it was all like, look at this. I mean, you can really appreciate the reefs, and everything, and how,
Yes.
how those, how those formed is really amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. Well, Mark, we have one final question for you. Who would you recommend our listeners learn more about that might be under the radar in the landscape photography space, or people that you find interesting?
Well, I would say, I'm one of those guys that doesn't just follow, only my friends on Instagram. I'm like, if you look at my Instagram, you can pretty much just, maybe there's like about 50 former clients of mine on there, but the other 175 people on there are pretty much, the people that I really respect, what they're doing across all genres of landscape photography. So, I've really tried to kind of pare that down and curate that as much as I can. There's too many people to name. Probably my favorite, if I had to just pick one photographer working today, is a fellow named Ignacio Palacios. And check his work out. It's wildlife, it's landscape, it's just like, oh my goodness, just wow. And I mean, he takes every kind of different perspective on everything, from the intimate scenes to the big landscapes, and he's an explorer and just really some amazing stuff. I'm also going to give a shout out to my good buddy and my brother from another mother from Greece, Panos Laskarakis. Panos Laskarakis is phenomenal talent. He's the master of walking up to absolutely nothing at all and making something out of it. His wildlife work is some of the most evocative wildlife work that you're ever going to see. It's just filled with mood and emotion, and just the way that he connects people not just to the animal but to the environment is amazing. And his landscape stuff, of course, is phenomenal. He does abstracts, does creative perspectives, but also you're probably going to see a lot of shots that look like mine on there too, because we have been on a lot of the same trips together. We travel together a lot, and
Right.
he's just a good, close, personal friend of mine. So shout out to Panos as well.
Awesome. Well, those sound like great
Mark,
recommendations.
that's the guy who had the picture of the lion or something.
Yes,
So the
looking
rib
through the
cage.
rib cage. Yeah. Check it out.
Oh, wow. That sounds awesome. Well, Mark, this has been amazing. I am so glad we could finally make this happen. And thank you so much to Rajesh for coordinating and somehow twisting your arm to make a go of this. We've been trying to make this happen for, I don't know, 5 years. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Since the
Mark,
podcast
it's not
started.
down. I know. Yeah, but it was great. Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate it. Thanks to Rajesh.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. It's been a real honor and pleasure talking to you. I hope it was fun for you too.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. It's been great talking to you guys. Have a good one.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you to Mark and Rajesh for taking the time to join us this week for an amazing conversation. What some listeners might not know is that I've been bugging Mark to join me on the podcast since I first dreamed up the idea of the podcast in 2017. So getting him for episode 300 was just an incredible milestone. Thank you, Mark, for agreeing to come on the show, and thanks, Rajesh, for convincing him to do so. I also really appreciated learning more about the personal aspects of your life, Mark, so thank you for opening up and sharing that with us today. As always, I'd love to hear back from listeners about anything that you gained from listening to this week's episode. I hope that you've enjoyed it. And if you did, please help us by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or by sharing this episode on social media. I appreciate all of you a lot. Lastly, if you want to level up your photography on the exact same forum that Mark did, NPN, well, I have a special offer for you. First, let me say that NPN is simply a wonderful community. The people there are very generous with their time, and they offer amazing critiques on your photographs and provide very thoughtful comments on your images. There's lots and lots of events happening on the site almost weekly, and it's just a great value for your money. If you're into nature photography as much as me, it's great value. For just $49 per year, you can join us on the community of NPN and gain access to some amazing benefits, including access to fantastic articles, webinars, thoughtful critique, discounted tutorials, discounts on software, discounts on books, yada yada yada, man. It's just awesome. It's a great place, and I'd love to see you there. Just head over to npn.link/fstop to join. You can also use the code FSTOP10 for a 10% discount. That's npn.link/fstop. Okay, well, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. I'll see you next week.